Hello and welcome to Reiki Women Podcast. It's me, Bronwen, Bronwen Logan from Reiki with Bronwen. And I've got my two colleagues here with me as always. So we have Michaela Daystar from Heartscapes Reiki. Yes. And Carrie Varela. It's been a while since we had a podcast. I'm forgetting everybody's details. Carrie Varela from the Reiki Healing Society. So welcome, welcome, welcome. And today we thought we'd have some fun talking about a subject which, since we are the Reiki Women Podcast, even though our podcast is obviously for men and women, we are women, hence the name of the podcast. And lots of Reiki practitioners are women. So there's something specific to women that we all go through if we get to a certain age. And that is this thing which sometimes is called the midlife crisis. Terrible thing, crisis. Oh my goodness. So is it a crisis? Is it not a crisis? Does it possibly have more potential than being a crisis? We're going to chat about that today and see where we're at with that, what we think and what we can do to possibly not avert the crisis, but perhaps transform the crisis. So I'm going to pass it over to Michaela, who's going to tell us what she thinks on this subject.
Yeah, it's a juicy one. Yeah, it's one of these that really kind of has us play in this intersection of like what's happening biologically in our body, what's happening socially in our families and in our life. How does our culture view us as women and as people in general when we go into a stage of transition in terms of age? And then what's happening spiritually, right? What is happening in the unseen spaces? And of course, as always, how can our Reiki practice intersect with all of this and perhaps, bring some spaciousness and some insight into this time? So the context that we're working with here, there's kind of these different sides of it. There's this concept of the midlife crisis, at least in America and in various places. There's this idea that you hit your mid 40s, usually they're about somewhere in between 40 and 50. And things start to shift, for women, of course, we start heading towards perimenopause and menopause. For men, there's things happening hormonally. We're hitting, career stages that often feel like they have transition to them. There's, family stages. Sometimes our kids are kind of moving out of the house around this time. So there's all these shifts and changes and transitions in all realms of life that tend to be happening around this time. And that's, a lot of that is external, but then there's this whole internal experience that we're having. And here's what I think, Michaela theory. Okay, so asterisk, this is my theory. I don't know if this is a thing, but what feels to me as I am in the midst of this myself as a 47-year-old woman, with many of these challenges and changes and transitions happening in my life right now, that there's all these shifts happening, but our culture doesn't make a lot of space for what's happening internally. So we tend to examine this from the external, right? The shifts in our family, in our career, in our biology. And we try to make meaning of that and the upheaval, and so we call it a crisis. And then we kind of give permission to all kinds of maybe not great behavior, like if somebody goes out and buys a sports car, like goes on a gambling binge or, makes some drastic change in their life that maybe isn't particularly well thought through. It's like there's an excuse for it. You're going through a midlife crisis. You're supposed to do some kind of big, I don't know what, just do whatever you want, like experience because you're in this crisis. But really what we're looking at is hitting up against a wall of deep discomfort and being in the midst of many changes that are happening all at once and not being given a lot of space to examine that from that internal place. What is actually changing internally? And I think that leads to so much discontent for us. And we've had some great conversations about navigating discomfort, about navigating change. How can our Reiki practice support us when we're going through big upheaval or those tiny changes that happen all the time? How do we, be with discomfort in a way that doesn't cause us to lash out or behave badly because we're uncomfortable? And all of that is magnified when we're in a period of life, and this isn't the only time that this happens, but when we're in a period of life where the changes and the discomforts are just piling on top of each other. And as I say, I am smack in the midst of that right now, right? In terms of family, like my mom just moved in, so we're blending our household. That represents a big transition in her life as far as her life stage. My kids are growing up, like all the things are happening in my life right now. I'm definitely feeling perimenopause just kind of flirting with me over there in the future, in the not so distant future. And there's been moments where it has felt like, oh shit, this is the crisis. This is it. This is the time when I'm supposed to be freaking out. But I really, as I've been with that this summer in particular, ladies, this summer has whooped my ass. Like, has just come in hot and hard, just absolutely has been bringing all of the things. And so I've really been in this place of reflection about this. Like, why do we associate this experience with crisis? Why do we give ourselves this context that says my life is in crisis right now? Right? Because a crisis is like the worst thing, right? Like that's the worst thing if you're in a crisis, right? And so how do we reframe that? And I remember years ago, before I was anywhere near this phase of life, hearing another person who was in this phase of life refer to it using a different adjective. And I don't remember what the adjective was that they used, but that stuck in my mind, this idea that we can reframe this away from a crisis to something else. And so I've been really playing with that. And, midlife alchemy is what started to come forward, right? Midlife expansion, midlife transition, lots of different adjectives that we could put in there. And what I realized is that thinking about it, framing it that way, and even be in a playful way, an open-ended way, like, what else could this be, has really, really changed my relationship with it, right? It feels like, you mentioned possibility in the intro, Bronwen, like it feels like actually, this is a time of unleashed potential, right? It's like when the butterfly goes into the cocoon and melts down and all of its earthly form melts down into this ooze of raw potential, and then it reforms itself into something different. And so that's what I've been playing with, is this question of what actually is this? It is not, I reject crisis. I do not take it on. I don't accept it. It's not a crisis. What else could it be? And of course, in what way does the fact that we have this consistent, supportive, expansive, nurturing practice of Reiki, like, come alongside this time period and help to lean into this idea that what's actually here is a pool of raw potential? So that's the question that I'm going to turn over to Carrie.
I love this conversation. I really enjoyed your posts celebrating, a reframing around this whole season in our lives. And I think our generation and the generation of women before us are really pioneers in so many ways of reframing this time in our life and really taking it in a way that can be a ritual, it can be a celebration, it can be a real way of initiation and marking into a new stage of our life. And so, as I was thinking about it, just midlife crisis, what comes to my mind is that I genuinely had a quarter life crisis, and I don't wish that on anyone. I actually feel like I already know what it's like to have a midlife crisis, because I had something that in all intents and purposes was a crisis. It was a quarter, what I called a quarter life crisis. And I've come to, come to peace with it and stuff like that. But basically, when I was 27, I completely like 180'd my life. And I had been on this track to be, an environmental scientist, and I was in a relationship, and I ended up getting a divorce. And then I followed this path of Reiki and yoga during that kind of time period of my life. Well, I was in counseling, kind of going through this quarter life crisis. And it was just this crisis of like, what do I want out of my life? And what really matters to me? Like, what really makes me happy? What makes me tick? Like, how do I want to spend my time? Like, and my counselor that I was working with was an astrologer, and we ended up doing an astrology session. And lo and behold, like literally the day I left my husband and left this relationship behind, Saturn had entered a new house in my life, and I had a traumatic Saturn return. So if you're familiar with Saturn, he transits 27 years through your chart, and and it marks the really what used to be the three real stages of our life. So our youth, our childhood, that first cycle is like 27 years. Like this is us like in our youth. And then the second stage is this midlife time. And then Saturn comes back through our chart, or we go through a whole revolution of Saturn through our chart, around the year 54. And then again in our 80s, right? I think it's 81. I'm doing my math right. So, but now that we actually can experience with our longer lifetime, we can experience 4 transits of Saturn in our life. And it was just very interesting that it was literally the day, that this shift was happening for me astrologically, that like this major life transition happened. And it gave me this kind of humbling awe for the cosmos. And that, maybe through my practice of Reiki, I am connected to this universal energy. And I'm not saying that astrology is perfect by any means, or that I can use it to predict my destiny or anything like that, but it just like it tells a different story, right? Of kind of our subconscious pulling and leaning. And yeah, so it was just so now when I think about somebody having a midlife crisis, I actually have a lot of compassion for that process, because I can imagine if you've been on this earth 54 years, or moving in that direction, at a certain point you got to question, like, what do I want out of life? Am I getting what I want out of life? Have I enjoyed my life enough? Am I doing the things that bring me joy? And so maybe that somewhat explains why people buy their really fancy cars, or they leave relationship behind and things like that during this time in their life. And interestingly, I just bought my like dream car. So I'm kind of chuckling about that too, because I'm like, I don't give a shit. This is the car that I love, and I want to celebrate myself and love myself this way. And just so happens that it's an electric vehicle as well too. So
What's your dream car, Carrie? What did you just get?
well, I mean, there's a lot of them. I was having a little obsession moment, but I bought this Volvo. So it's a Volvo, and it is a plug-in hybrid. So I can go 30 miles on that car without using any gas. And we just so happened to put solar on our house too, which was just like amazing. And these are all kind of my values coming together. It was really exciting to see this happen. But I literally can drive 30 miles on sunshine every day. And like that makes me really happy. And actually, every time I make that car payment, I am so stoked to make it, because I love driving my car. And it's a great car. It's got 3 rows. I can throw the kids in there. It's like got a soccer mom vibe, but it's also this badass car, and it's really, really safe too. Like there's never even reported fatality in this car. So all these things make me really happy, and it's joy, right? And we're allowed these joys. We should. And in our midlife, we should be able to. Like maybe that is one of the fruits of growing older, is that we can enjoy life's comforts, hopefully more. And underneath us, right? But it's also just really interesting too, because I am also feeling the leanings towards perimenopause. And I'm not really sure why. I actually have a doctor's appointment coming up, but I have missed my first period, and I am 43, and I really should not be probably going through perimenopause so early, but I am. And it's also quite a profound transition, and I'm just really tapping into it. And maybe the beginnings of it can be the most painful in some ways, because I literally feel like part of my body is dying, and I am going through this process of death and transformation. And I think actually, Ron, when you said it once, on this podcast once, it's like, how our womanhood sometimes so defined by, our menstruation, our cycles, and like that, like, there's this whole periods of our life where we're not menstruating, and like we still are this vibrant. I mean, we're still women, so I'm really feeling into that. But it is a journey and a process, and I'm really feeling like the intense hormonal shifts and things like that. And so I don't think we haven't been able to talk about that enough. Generations of women prior to us, to really talk about the impact this has on our mental health, our emotional health, our physical health. So I'm excited about this generation of women, like all of my friends, and there's a big part of me that still feels like I'm 30. Just like sometimes I'm like, oh my goodness, like I don't. It'll be really interesting how I feel when I'm 54 and when I'm 70, and um, that inner feeling of like, God, I've witnessed my life, and this kind of movement and shift and transition through many stages of my life, but coming into my elder years, I'm kind of not, I'm not ready yet, but I'm opening the door. I'm allowing myself to be more ready.
Yeah. Well, I still feel like you said 27. I think 27 is probably a good age I'd pick. So yeah, it's a funny thing. It's a bit like, we've often talked also about that idea of the labyrinth, that you're always in the same spot. You just have, so it's still like, I still feel 27, but it is different to what I felt when I was 27 simply because of the life experiences that I've had between when I was 27 and now I'm 57. So that's 30 years difference. Yeah, I remember when I was a kid and my mum talking to her female relatives, and everything would be whispered, and it was very much the words, I think they used to call it the change. Is that right? I think that's what they used to call it. And it was always very hush hush, and it's always like the change. So yeah, no one really, I mean, thank goodness we don't live in that time, because that whole putting everything under the carpet and not being able to talk about it. And we really are blessed in that sense that we can just actually talk about it, and it's not such a big thing. I think since I went into I guess perimenopause when I was 49, which apparently is the median or whatever, that is sort of like, out of all the ages, that's the most common age, I guess. And yeah, what was I going to say about that? See, that's what happens basically. It did happen to me. But I have actually regained a lot of that. But I know, like, when I was that age, I was just starting a third year in a Bachelor of Arts, doing philosophy and literature. And my brain left me completely. It just left me. I could not get my thoughts together. I don't know what, I felt like I could not get my thoughts together. I had to stop study. I had to stop everything. I had about 6 months of no brain at all. And I could not believe that was, that this was happening. It was very strange. Plus, you have the hot flushes and the da-da-da. It just goes on. But so there are a lot of changes. It's very real. But if I think about life, and this is sort of what you were just saying, Carrie, life is change. It's just that sometimes there's more changes than other times. Oh, and I did remember what I was going to say before. Since that I went into menopause, then I have noticed so much being written about it, and it never used to be. It's really become something that people, women, we hold up half the world. So, we are talking about and writing about, and that's really wonderful. And I'm so thrilled to see all that out there. And it was strange when I started seeing that, and I thought, wow, you realize how it wasn't spoken about and how people didn't want to talk about it. And even, even me, I felt a little uncomfortable, like, oh my God, all these articles about menopause. Do we need that? Almost I felt like that because it was just so unusual to see, and so wonderful, actually, right? Yeah, there's so much about this. But yeah, I think this thing about always changing. And when I started working with the system of Reiki, they had this thing called a healing crisis. And that brought to mind what you were saying, Michaela. I was really against this idea of a healing crisis, because I was like, how can healing be a crisis? And it's also making a drama out of something that, we love drama, we love stories. But it doesn't have to be, and it's just how we would view it. And so, I immediately I was like, well, I'm not going to say healing crisis, because that is ridiculous. So, whatever it is, that we're clearing, we're shifting things, and we feel it. And that really actually translates through to what is happening to us as women. And this idea that, yes, we have our periods for, I don't know, 20 to 30 years of our life. Well, that's a limited period of our life. And, the fertility of that. So that is, once that's gone, it's just a shifting and a changing. But we shifted and changed into that in the first place. And now then we shift and change out of that. And now what happens? This is what I think is the exciting thing. And I think you've both touched on it, that thing of that expanse of is out there in front of us. And it's not bound by um uh maybe I'm going to have a baby or not, like whatever, it's not bound by the body doing those sorts of functions. In fact, it's a freedom, and it's a wonderful freedom. And if we can, we have to adjust and shift and accept the different things that happen to us. So, I still get hot flushes, and that's like, oh, what is that? 7 years on, right? But my brain came back, thank God. And I mean, there's things. Oh, and I got a Buddha belly. We've just been talking about this in my household, and I was trying to reframe it in a positive in a positive light. And I thought, it's a Buddha belly. I just had this recognition the other night. I'm like, it's a Buddha belly. That's what I've got. I am actually sort of probably going to, I'll keep it for a little while, but I don't think it should stay. But, it is a lovely idea that if you think about it, I know that Buddha was, well, a guy, I guess, if we're looking at it in those terms. But, this idea of, you see those beautiful little statues, let's say they're androgynous, and it's this thing of the belly and being a sign of wisdom and maturity. And, I thought, well, I'm going to embrace that. And, yeah, take that in, because who do we become? I mean, archetypally, I guess we become what, the crone? I don't know. Michaela, you're up on that. I don't know. Do I want to be a crone? Yeah, but I mean, do I have to label myself? I feel like I said, like there's this freedom of anything. I saw Julia Roberts. There was something, I don't know if you've seen pictures of Julia Roberts more recently. I saw them on Facebook, and you know, she she has aged, and she's not she was a very beautiful woman. She still is a beautiful woman. It's really interesting, and she's aged, and she hasn't obviously been doing anything to change her face or anything like that. She's just let herself age. And it is such a joy to see that. And that's why when I do stuff for my Facebook stuff or my website or whatever, I often try to incorporate older women into it, because we need to see older women. We need to see what they look like. And, I'm hoping to move into that myself. I want to be like a beautiful older woman. And I don't mean beautiful by no wrinkles or anything like that. I want to shine as myself and be myself. And if I do have a Buddha belly, well, I guess maybe lucky me. I don't know. It's just that whole having to embrace something that our society hasn't embraced. And that is changing. I do see that changing. And the thing for us is that we are all a part of society. So even though we don't realize it, sometimes we have these prejudices. I have prejudices. Of course I have prejudices. And that's why talking about things like this together is really great, because it helps us to release or recognize, shine light upon, and start to think about, oh, actually it's okay if, and yeah. So I'm feeling pretty good. And moving into, yeah, like you said, there's external changes, internal changes, but that's life. It doesn't
Yeah.
stay the same. And it is opening out in front of us.
Yeah.
I'm open for it.
You know, that all is so rich. And as you were talking about that like 6 month period when the hormonal changes like seem to rob your brain for that period of time, it's really profound to hear you say, and I stopped school and I rested and I stopped. Because I think that's part of why we interpret it as crisis. Because when we go through these organic changes that are gonna happen, like they're part of the natural cycle of things, but we're inside of a structure that says, well, you have to stay consistently productive until you retire at age 65. So you go into this, crisis in your mid 40s, early 50s, and you slow down, your productivity shifts, your ability to concentrate shifts, the things that you care about shifts, but you're supposed to maintain a certain status quo until a certain arbitrary period of time. Yeah, no wonder that feels like crisis. We're not encouraged to and given space to rest, to stop, to reassess, to reevaluate. Should I be spending my time now? And we now know that like this isn't just connected to the biology of child rearing, although that is certainly the biological container that is most consistent across people. But even energetically, the idea of like there being this middle part of our life where creativity and productivity and nurturing and expanding is the energy of that time. And then there's this shift, and there's a different energy that comes in, right? There's a wisdom energy, there's a rest energy, there's a reflection energy, there's a freedom energy, as you named. And our culture just does not have any time for that, like just no room for that until you're much, much older. So no wonder we think about it as a crisis. And so, a lot of my process of becoming an adult certainly over the last 12 years, I would say most specifically, has been, yeah, I didn't start identifying as an adult until the last 12 years for sure. A lot of it has been an investigation of how can we reclaim these natural rhythms even inside of this unnatural container that we're in, and where can we create spaces that honor those rhythms even inside of this larger container that doesn't, so that we can stay connected to those rhythms even though we can't necessarily live our complete life that way. And I'm really thinking about that because I just came back from one of those spaces this past weekend, over the holiday weekend for 4 days. I was at the Women's Herbal Symposium, the Northern California Women's Herbal Symposium. And it's basically a 4 day like hippie women village in the woods. So if you can imagine an intentional community built entirely of women and children, and entirely honoring cycles of life and the rhythms of life, and then coming together to teach each other about herbal medicine and energy. And I always volunteer to offer Reiki sessions there, and women's health and reproductive health and plant relationships and folk ways, so how to make things with your hands, how to create things, and just in this communal teaching and learning space, it changes the rhythm, even just being there for 4 days. And there's lots of spaces like this, right? And spaces where people have created a different rhythm. This particular one this is the 34th annual, so it's a pretty well established thing, but also, quite young when we think about the fact that it's looking back to ways of being that are quite a bit older than our time. And I love that we're in this time of like modernity and an acknowledgement of the need to look to different rhythms, right? Both of you have spoken to that, of the way that, people talk about these things differently than they did even 20, 30 years ago. There is more of an acknowledgement of the need to be in conversation and in relationship with cycles and with rhythms in a way that isn't necessarily aligned with the capitalist cycle of productivity that we all live inside of to one degree or another, and most of us to a pretty high degree. The culminating event at this symposium is a 3-hour ritual that walks through 4 transition rituals: the transition from childhood into young personhood, the transition from young personhood into adulthood, and the transition into the crone age. They do use that term, crone, but the kind of elder wisdom age, and then into death. And I've witnessed this ritual conducted the same way a number of times, and it's so powerful, and it's so beautifully designed and worked out, where as a community we're really feeling those cycles coming through, and then we're feeling our particular place, and we're stepping into the ritual at the moment when that represents wherever we are in that process, and then also just everybody holding everybody wherever they are in that process. And it's just this like full nervous system, like full system reminder that we are animals of this earth, and we do move according to the cycles of the earth. Our bodies are designed that way, right? We are designed to move through seasons and to do that in a way that's according to nature's laws, not the laws that we design as people, at least in these days. So, all of that is to say that we're well positioned, I think, culturally now to have these conversations and to find that sweet spot where we're not going to cancel modernity, right? Like, we're not going to cancel the way that life is now, but we also don't have to forsake what we've always known. And this piece around like mutual education and taking responsibility for teaching and learning with each other outside of formalized institutions, trusting our own knowledge and skills and the lineages that we have followed to get into those places of authority in a particular realm. And to trust that is a really powerful thing. I mean, in 3 days working in the wellness center, I learned, first of all, this is going to maybe blow some people's minds. It blew my mind that our uterus can get quite out of alignment where it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be in a particular spot for a particular reason, in a particular orientation. And it can and does move around, and it can and does get stuck in the wrong place. And that causes all kinds of problems. And that sounded really scary to me when I first heard that. But then I spent all weekend watching women just fixing that problem, just moving it back into place, just identifying what was going wrong and just fixing it. And these profound, like miraculous healings that occurred because somebody got back into proper alignment inside of their body, not because, of an authority figure, but because another woman just knew how to do that. And this is the traditions that we've all come from somewhere back in our lineage. And, I have a similar feeling in my Reiki practice that this is a lineage of healing and of people passing it from person to person with authority and with respect to lineage and with specific knowledge that gets passed in particular ways. And we've certainly spent a lot of time in this space talking about the importance of, preservation of knowledge in particular ways and passing it along with integrity. But to do that in a way that really creates individual, family, and community like empowerment and sufficiency around our own well-being, and puts us back into the cycles of life in a way that tends to our overall health in a way that nothing else can. So I offer that as an invitation to us and to all of you out there listening to us to find those spaces that are creating that kind of remembrance, whether it's a women's space or some other type of space that is really leaning back into community empowerment and sufficiency around how do we be an animal in this world and to do that well.
Yeah, I think the one thing that just really resonates with both of what you were saying, and I love that you took that time, Bronwen, to rest. And that's ultimately actually what I did too in my quarter life crisis, is that I really disconnected from my life for a period of time, and rested and did a lot of Reiki and kind of reemerged. Well, I went to India and traveled for, a bucket list trip that I've always wanted to take. And actually like getting memories from when I was in India 13 years ago, kind of popping up because it was like this time of year. So it's always so beautiful to reflect on that time in my life. But, that was what finally or that's what I needed. And I knew that I needed that. I knew that in order for me to feel like I could really ground into what I really wanted in this life, I needed time to step away and reflect. And I had wished that had I known or had that given myself that permission, after high school or after college, or if there's any season in our life where we can just have some space to figure it out. I mean, how many of us are lost in confusion? I mean, we can spend most of our life lost in confusion. And it's an unfortunate truth, but there's moments of this really profound clarity. And that's what I found was the thing that really makes me happy is Reiki and yoga. And that's what I want to spend my time doing. I'm going to trust that this is the right path for me. So that's what I did, and I see that, can happen at so many different stages in our life, but, unless you're a professor or something like that, you're not going to give this freedom to take a year off and have a sabbatical. And we need that. You need that. And I see some people in my, parents' generation, they never had that their whole life. And their retirement has become this time of rest and reflection. And they literally forced and pushed themselves their whole life to the point of really not. I mean, that's just not healthy. I agree. I think we really do need more time to step back and reflect. And then just to tether this back to Reiki, it's just that how powerful it is to, in our Reiki practice, to meet ourselves where we're at in our day, in this day, and step away from what could have been, what should have been, how I could have done this, I could have done that. Just be where we are today, and accept that, and also trust that we made the right choices for us, and life and universe is meeting us where we're at. It's never oh, let's go back 10 steps. No. Here you are today, so where do we want to go now? And that there's just this unlimited vast potential in any moment of what's possible. And that's something that my Reiki practice always helps me tap into. That if I can get out of my way, if I can get out of my worried, obsessed mind, if I can get out of my anxiety and overwhelm, I can realize that there are an infinite amount of possibilities. So which possibilities do I want to breathe life into and create for myself and for others too? right? And we can feel those tugs in our heart. We can feel those tugs in our consciousness. We all have an ability to tap into that. And so I think for so many generations before us, and hopefully many generations beyond us, it's like this trusting our own inner knowing. That is also something that we can really access with Reiki. Trusting that inner knowing and trusting that it is taking us into a place of fulfillment and joy. We will find fulfillment and joy if we choose to follow that path of those that bring us fulfillment and joy. And we're worthy of it. That that's the ultimate, practice of self-love, is to give yourself what you love, and not just once, but a lot. And love to hear what your thoughts are, Bronwen.
Yeah. Well, I guess I feel like I can follow on from that a little bit. You're talking about cycles and just that whole cyclical, um, that how I mean, we have big cycles, we have small cycles, we have cycles within cycles, and it's us moving and shifting, and it's sort of like what I was talking before about this idea that we're always in the same spot, but we're still going through these cycles. And our society doesn't really work with that, and it's something that we have to somehow take control of that ourselves, and listen to that. You both talked about that, being in tune with your nature and nature. And that is something that the system of Reiki brings us, because that is what it's about. It's about, I mean, Ray, this thing, this nature of which we are a part. We're not separate to. So, yeah, I think that definitely the system of Reiki, if even just thinking of it, if our heads are in the space of it, that it helps us just to see ourselves differently. And the mind is such a powerful thing. So very, very, very powerful place for us to be. And yeah, I just thinking about moving through those different cycles. And I realized, just looking back, that a lot of those cycles that, I felt that I've had to move through are cycles of having to listen to other people tell you about yourself and not really being yourself. So having to cycle through that and out of that, and move into a new cycle. And for me, I think that's a lot of what this is. And it's, yes, we talked about freedom. It's actually finding things for yourself that are not being I don't know what the words are here, but not being told by others what that is, and really discovering it for yourself. Finding the joy, as you were saying, Carrie, and really moving and shifting with that, rather than other people's, I guess, expectations maybe is part of it. And yes, just having that, it's a reclaiming of power. And I'm all for that. And I'm enjoying that process and the cycle of that. So I look forward to see where it takes me, my colleagues, listeners. And I have to say, we do have male listeners, and men, you also have your cycles, right? That it may not be quite as extreme because you didn't give birth to anyone, but you know what? I mean, that is sort of like, what's the shifting, changing thing? But we all go through cycles. And I actually know that there is a male version of menopause called andropause. So we can't forget that you two have your own things that you need to move through. And I'm sure there is similar to us, Sarah, moving into your own power. I mean, we all as a society have pressures upon us as parents, as first children, parents, and then moving beyond. We'll always be parents or related to something like that, but we can move beyond that. And, I believe that is the Buddha belly of life, right? The wisdom. So, yeah, that's it, baby. So I will say goodbye to you all now, and thanks for listening in. Please make sure we really should say that like at the beginning, in the middle. I notice press like, do subscribe, please follow us, all those lovely things. And we'll see you next time. It's been lovely. Lots of love. Mwah.